For years, Lizzo was celebrated as a beacon of body positivity, empowerment, and self-love. Rising from humble beginnings to international superstardom, she shattered stereotypes and gave millions permission to embrace their true selves. Her anthems of confidence, her unapologetic joy, her fierce message that beauty comes in every size, shape, and color made her not just a musician but a movement. In an industry obsessed with impossible standards, Lizzo stood tall as a symbol that things could change. Yet in 2023, that image cracked in a way no one expected. The news broke like a thunderclap. A group of Lizzo's former dancers filed a lawsuit accusing her of harassment, weight-shaming, and fostering a hostile work environment. The very woman who had preached acceptance and kindness was now being painted as a manipulative figure who allegedly created an atmosphere of fear, humiliation, and body-based discrimination. The public reaction was immediate and visceral. Fans who had once screamed her lyrics with pride now stared in disbelief, headlines flashing across their screens. The contradictions between Lizzo's public persona and the allegations made it all the more devastating. The lawsuit detailed disturbing claims. According to the dancers, Lizzo had allegedly pressured them into participating in uncomfortable activities, made demeaning remarks about their bodies, and created an environment where speaking up meant risking retaliation. They described a world behind the glittering stage where favoritism, humiliation, and fear ruled. They claimed that Lizzo's management team encouraged unhealthy competition, fostered a toxic hierarchy, and enabled behavior that undermined the very values Lizzo claimed to champion. Perhaps the most painful part of the accusations was the claim of weight shaming. One of Lizzo's core messages had been that every body deserved respect. Yet former dancers alleged that they were ridiculed or reprimanded for gaining weight for not appearing as energetic or slim as Lizzo supposedly demanded. The irony was cutting, devastating, and impossible to ignore. The woman who had become an icon of radical self-acceptance was now accused of wielding the very prejudices she had fought so hard against. As the news spread, Lizzo initially remained silent. A wall of PR statements from her team painted the dancers as disgruntled former employees trying to smear her name. But the silence from Lizzo herself rang loud to many, especially to those who had looked to her as a hero. Silence in the face of such serious accusations did not align with the image she had so carefully built, an image of honesty, openness, and radical love. Social media exploded. Supporters defended her passionately, arguing that celebrities were easy targets for baseless lawsuits. Others, particularly those in the body positivity and feminist movements, expressed heartbreak and betrayal. To them, Lizzo's alleged behavior was not just a personal failing, it was a betrayal of a community that had embraced her as one of their own, a betrayal of a movement that was bigger than any one individual. Meanwhile, the dancers who filed the lawsuit stood firm in their claims, appearing on major platforms to tell their side of the story, their voices steady yet emotional. They spoke about the fear they had felt, the guilt they had wrestled with, and the courage it had taken to speak out against a powerful figure. They were not just suing for damages. They said they were standing up for themselves, for others who had been silenced, and for the ideals that had been trampled. In the background, other stories began to emerge. Anonymous sources, former employees, and insiders hinted that the toxic culture described by the dancers was not an isolated incident. Rumors of high turnover, secretive backstage rules, and whispered complaints began to surface, painting a darker picture of Lizzo's empire than fans had ever seen before. The glamorous, joyful image projected on stage hid a backstage world where smiles were forced, loyalty was demanded, and dissent was punished. As public opinion shifted, media outlets dissected every aspect of Lizzo's career. Her lyrics, her interviews, her activism, all were re-examined through the harsh, new lens of the allegation. The story was no longer about music. It was about trust, about what happens when a symbol of hope and empowerment is revealed to be flawed, to be human, to be capable of causing the very harm they had once pledged to fight against. The fallout was only just beginning. Careers, reputations, movements themselves now hung in the balance. As Lizzo prepared her response and the legal battle loomed ahead, one thing was certain. The world that had once embraced her with unconditional love would now demand answers. demand accountability, and demand to know whether the woman who sang about loving yourself had forgotten to extend that love to those around her. As days turned into weeks, the allegations against Lizzo refused to fade from the headlines. What once might have been dismissed as a momentary controversy began to evolve into a deeper reckoning, not just for Lizzo, but for the entire industry that had elevated her as a symbol of empowerment. Fans, journalists, and former insiders started to re-examine the carefully constructed narrative that had made Lizzo a global icon. Underneath the glitter and glamour, new cracks were appearing, exposing a far more complicated and troubling reality. The dancers who had filed the lawsuit appeared on major talk shows and news outlets, sharing painful details about their experiences. They described an environment where favoritism was rampant, where dissent was punished with sudden terminations, and where body image, ironically the very thing Lizzo had fought so publicly to liberate, was wielded as a weapon. Their accounts were not filled with anger, but with profound sadness and disappointment. They had believed in Lizzo's message. They had believed they were part of something bigger than themselves. Instead, they said they found themselves trapped in a toxic system masked by messages of love and acceptance. Lizzo's silence stretched longer than many expected. When she finally did respond, it was through a carefully worded statement posted to social media. She denied the allegations, expressing sadness that former employees would portray their time together in such a negative light. She framed herself as a victim of false accusations and emphasized her commitment to hard work, high standards, and artistic excellence. Yet for many observers, the statement fell flat. It lacked the emotional authenticity that had once been Lizzo's greatest strength. It felt clinical, defensive, detached from the pain that had already been laid bare. The backlash grew fiercer. Prominent voices in the body positivity movement, many of whom had once championed Lizzo, began to distance themselves. Advocacy groups that had previously partnered with her issued cautious statements expressing concern and support for the dancers coming forward. Social media campaigns calling for accountability gained momentum. Justice for the dancers trended for days, with thousands sharing their own stories of workplace abuse and the betrayal they felt when figures of empowerment used their power to harm rather than uplift. Behind the scenes, Lizzo's team worked frantically to contain the fallout. Scheduled appearances were canceled. Sponsorships were quietly dropped or put on hold. Some radio stations even began to reduce the rotation of her songs, wary of associating with an artist now mired in controversy. Her team explored legal options to fight the lawsuit, but the court of public opinion had already delivered its own harsh verdict. Meanwhile, whispers continued to grow. Anonymous accounts from other former employees and collaborators surfaced online, painting a similar picture of a backstage environment dominated by fear, secrecy, and control. Though not all could be verified, the sheer number of claims added to the perception that the lawsuit was not an isolated grievance, but a glimpse into a broader, deeply flawed system. The emotional toll on all sides was immense. For the dancers, the decision to come forward had been costly. They faced online harassment, attacks on their character, and immense pressure from Lizzo's most devoted fans. Yet they remained steadfast, insisting that telling the truth was worth the pain. For Lizzo, the experience was isolating. Friends grew distant. Public support wavered. The laughter, the confidence, the boldness that had once defined her seemed to shrink beneath the weight of the scandal. As the lawsuit moved forward, legal experts weighed in. They explained that the case was about more than just individual actions. It was about the systemic power imbalance between celebrities and those who worked for them. It raised questions about the hidden realities of the entertainment industry, where charisma and public messaging could mask serious abuses of power behind the scenes. Lizzo's case became a symbol of that conversation, a painful reminder that even those who speak the loudest about empowerment can sometimes fail to practice what they preach. In the midst of it all, a deeper sadness settled over the fans who had once found solace in Lizzo's music. Songs that had once been anthems of freedom and self-love now felt complicated, tinged with a sense of betrayal. The artists we love, it seemed, could hurt us not only through their actions, but through the shattering of the ideals they once stood for. The path forward for Lizzo grew murkier by the day. Redemption, if it was even possible, would require more than a carefully crafted statement. It would demand accountability, humility, and real change. Whether she was willing or able to walk that difficult road remained to be seen. The scandal was no longer just about a few dancers and a few bad moments. It was about truth and power, and the complex, often painful reality behind the sparkling facade of fame. And the world was watching, waiting to see what Lizzo would do next. In the wake of the lawsuit, the world surrounding Lizzo seemed to fracture into pieces. Every interview she had ever given about self-love, every acceptance speech she had delivered about inclusivity and respect was replayed with a new, harsher lens. The accusations had shattered not only her personal reputation, but also the powerful emotional connection she had forged with fans who had once seen her as a safe space in a judgmental world. The idea that Lizzo herself could be capable of the very toxicity she claimed to stand against left many feeling disoriented, betrayed, and heartbroken. The legal case pushed forward, slowly and relentlessly. More evidence surfaced, more former. Dancers, though not all willing to go public, corroborated details of the toxic environment behind the scenes. Some spoke about the unspoken rules that governed the tour, the favoritism, the pressure to behave in specific ways to stay in Lizzo's good graces, the feeling that their bodies were being watched, judged, and criticized. One dancer revealed how she had dreamed of dancing for Lizzo, believing it would be a place of freedom and celebration, only to find herself battling anxiety, shame, and fear daily. In the media, the story evolved. What had initially seemed like a shocking headline became a broader cultural conversation about the weaponization of empowerment. How could someone who publicly fought for acceptance turn private spaces into places of judgment and exclusion? How could someone who preached about body positivity allegedly shame others for not fitting an invisible, personal standard? The contradictions cut deep, and they forced uncomfortable questions, not just about Lizzo, but about celebrity culture itself. Experts weighed in. Psychologists spoke about the phenomenon of power altering even the best intentions. Cultural critics dissected the paradox of celebrities becoming larger-than-life symbols and losing touch with the values they once championed. Survivors of workplace harassment shared their own experiences of working for figures who preached kindness publicly but ruled through fear privately. It became clear that Lizzo's scandal was not isolated. It was part of a painful pattern across industries where image mattered more than integrity. Throughout it all, Lizzo maintained her innocence. She insisted that the allegations were false, exaggerated, or misrepresented. She portrayed herself as a hard-working artist demanding excellence from those around her. But the line between excellence and exploitation, between leadership and control, is often thin, and the lawsuit's claims suggested that Lizzo had crossed that line without recognizing it, or worse, without caring. The emotional toll was visible. Lizzo's social media presence, once a source of joy and playfulness, became more guarded, more distant. The once frequent glimpses into her life, her laughter, her celebration of body positivity faded into curated promotional posts and carefully managed messages. She appeared at award shows but avoided addressing the controversy directly, a strategy that only fueled further speculation and resentment. In a world that demands authenticity, silence can be as loud as any confession. Meanwhile, the dancers, at the center of the case, continued to endure waves of online harassment. They were called liars, opportunists, traitors. Some received threats. Yet they stood firm, speaking about the importance of accountability, the need to expose hypocrisy, the necessity of creating workplaces that genuinely lived up to the ideals they preached. They were not just fighting for themselves, but for every artist, performer, and worker who had been hurt by systems that protected fame over fairness. The financial implications for Lizzo grew severe. Brands hesitated to collaborate. Planned tours faced lower ticket sales. Sponsors began to quietly pull away. While she remained a beloved figure to many, the scandal had indelibly changed her brand. No longer was she just the voice of radical acceptance. She was a reminder that power, even when wrapped in positivity, can corrupt, and that real change requires more than catchy slogans and colorful costume. As the lawsuit approached critical stages, rumors circulated about potential settlements. Some speculated that Lizzo's team was seeking to resolve the case quietly to avoid a prolonged trial and further damage to her reputation. Others argued that a true reckoning required public accountability, not confidential agreements. The tension between protecting a career and delivering justice pulsed beneath every headline, every social media post, every whispered insider report. The collapse of Lizzo's image was not just about one woman's alleged actions. It was about the collapse of a space that millions had trusted. It was about the disillusionment that follows when heroes reveal their humanity in the ugliest ways. It was about the painful truth that sometimes even the loudest voices for love and acceptance can lose their way, and that rebuilding trust, once broken, is a slow, difficult, and deeply personal journey. As the world waited for the next move, a public apology, a court ruling, a comeback attempt, one thing was certain. Lizzo's story, once a shining beacon of hope, now stood as a complex cautionary tale about fame, power, and the fragile nature of the ideals we hold most dear. As the legal battles continued and the media storm raged on, Lizzo faced a crossroads that few artists ever encounter. She could continue to deny, to fight, to insulate herself behind lawyers and loyalists. Or she could confront the painful possibility that somewhere along the way, the person she had become no longer fully reflected the values she had once so passionately championed. The world was watching closely, looking for signs of accountability, signs of real change. Yet the path forward was fraught with peril, and every step she took seemed to sink her deeper into the quicksand of controversy. The weight of the accusations grew heavier as more former employees, dancers, and industry insiders spoke out. Some shared their stories anonymously, afraid of retaliation but determined to add their voices to the growing chorus. They described an environment where criticism was not welcome, where perfection was demanded at any cost, and where loyalty was valued more than honesty. They painted a portrait of an empire built not on empowerment, but on control and fear. An empire where smiles were part of the costume and silence was the price of survival. Meanwhile, Lizzo's public appearances grew rare and strained. When she did perform, critics noted a different energy, a guardedness that had not been there before. The spontaneous joy that once defined her stage presence now seemed rehearsed, almost mechanical. Fans who attended her shows spoke of an uncomfortable tension, a sense that everyone in the room knew what had changed, but no one wanted to say it out loud. The music remained powerful, but the emotional connection, the feeling of authenticity, had been fractured. In private, sources close to Lizzo described a woman grappling with profound isolation and heartbreak. Friends distanced themselves. Business partners grew wary. The inner circle that had once shielded her from criticism now thinned, leaving her to face the harsh realities of public opinion largely alone. Even some of her most ardent defenders began to question whether loyalty to Lizzo meant compromising their own values. The collapse of trust was slow but relentless, like a bridge eroding under the constant pounding of a rising tide. The lawsuit itself became a symbol of broader cultural shifts. Conversations about celebrity accountability intensified. Activists pointed out how often powerful figures co-opt social movements for personal gain, using the language of justice and empowerment while perpetuating the very abuses they claimed to fight. Lizzo's case became a flashpoint for discussions about performative activism, about the danger of mistaking marketing for morality. Amidst this cultural reckoning, Lizzo's legal team launched a more aggressive defense strategy. They attempted to dismiss parts of the lawsuit, to discredit the plaintiffs, to reframe the narrative. But each legal maneuver only seemed to deepen the public's distrust. Many viewed the tactics as further proof that power was being used to silence rather than to heal. In the court of public opinion, Lizzo's image continued to deteriorate. One headline, one social media post, one unaddressed accusation at a time. Through it all, the dancers who had filed the lawsuit remained remarkably composed. In interviews, they spoke not just about their own pain, but about the broader need for change. They emphasized that their fight was not about destroying Lizzo's career, but about holding her accountable for the harm they said she had caused. Their courage resonated with many, particularly those who had felt betrayed by the gap between Lizzo's public persona and the private reality described in the lawsuit. At the same time, a painful question lingered in the air. Was redemption possible? Could Lizzo acknowledge the hurt, make amends, and rebuild trust? Or had the damage been too great, the disillusionment too deep? Artists have come back from scandals before, but the path is always steep and uncertain, requiring not just words but actions, not just image management but genuine transformation. As summer turned to fall, Lizzo remained largely silent on the deeper emotional truths at the heart of the scandal. Statements were issued, lawyers spoke on her behalf, but the vulnerable, unguarded Lizzo, the Lizzo who once stood on stage and wept openly about the power of self-love, seemed lost. And without that vulnerability, the bridge to her fans, to the public, remained broken. The struggle for redemption is never easy, and it cannot be scripted or spun. It requires the humility to face hard truths, the courage to change, and the willingness to rebuild slowly, piece by painful piece. Whether Lizzo would find that path, whether she even wanted to, remained unclear. What was certain was that the world that had once crowned her as a queen of self-love now demanded something far deeper, far harder, genuine accountability, and real healing. The world was no longer interested in slogans or performances. It was interested in truth. By the end of 2023, the scandal surrounding Lizzo had settled into a strange, uncomfortable permanence. It was no longer front-page news, yet it lingered everywhere, an unspoken shadow trailing her every move. Each new song, each public appearance, each social media post carried with it a weight that had not been there before. The bright, bold image of Lizzo as a fearless champion of self-love and empowerment now existed alongside a darker, more complicated reality. The woman who had inspired millions was now faced with the enormous task of rebuilding a fractured legacy, if that was even possible. The lawsuit filed by her former dancers moved steadily through the legal system. Though Lizzo's team fought hard to contain the damage, negotiating behind closed doors, the accusations remained public record. The dancers continued to speak out, their stories painting a vivid and painful picture of a work environment that seemed antithetical to everything Lizzo had once represented. The allegations of weight shaming, humiliation, and fostering a hostile work environment stood in stark contrast to her brand of body positivity and radical acceptance. No matter how skilled the legal defense, no matter how polished the PR campaigns, the damage to Lizzo's credibility was undeniable. For her most loyal fans, known affectionately as lesbians, the scandal created an agonizing rift. Some stood by her, insisting that the accusations were exaggerated or false, a smear campaign against a successful black woman who had broken barriers. Others struggled with the dissonance, mourning the loss of the figure they had trusted, loved, and seen as a symbol of hope. Social media arguments raged on, dividing communities that had once come together to celebrate Lizzo's message. It was a painful reminder that when public figures fall, they often bring parts of their audience down with them. In the broader cultural conversation, Lizzo's scandal became a case study in the dangers of celebrity worship. Experts warned about the risks of placing human beings on pedestals, of mistaking charisma for character and slogans for substance. Lizzo had been a symbol of resilience, joy, and transformation. Her fall revealed how easily those symbols can be corrupted when power goes unchecked. It forced a collective reckoning about the kinds of behaviors that are excused or ignored in the entertainment industry and what real empowerment truly looks like. Privately, Lizzo faced the consequences. Sources close to her described a woman wrestling with guilt, anger, and fear. She spent months in therapy, reflecting on her actions, her leadership style, and the pain she had caused. Yet healing from such deep wounds is not quick, nor is it guaranteed. Redemption requires not just acknowledging harm, but committing to lasting change, a process far more difficult and painful than releasing a heartfelt statement or a tearful interview. Professionally, Lizzo's career faced an uphill battle. New projects were delayed, endorsements became scarce. Industry insiders speculated about whether she would ever reclaim her former place at the top of the charts. Some believed she could stage a comeback, citing examples of other celebrities who had weathered storms through authenticity and hard work. Others were less optimistic, noting that the trust Lizzo had broken was not easily rebuilt. Her brand had been based on something deeper than just catchy songs or entertaining performances. It had been built on an emotional promise, a promise that now felt broken for many. As 2024 began, Lizzo made tentative steps toward rebuilding. She donated to organizations supporting workplace rights and body positivity. She hired new staff focused on creating healthier, safer environments for her teams. She hinted at new music that would address the scandal, though fans wondered whether vulnerability would truly return to her work. There were signs of growth, signs of struggle. Signs of a woman learning, slowly and painfully, how to move forward after the world she had built collapsed around her. The final judgment on Lizzo's legacy remains unwritten. Time has a way of softening scandals, of allowing space for growth and redemption, but it also has a way of preserving deep betrayals in the public consciousness. For Lizzo, the road back to trust would not be paved with catchy anthems or colorful music videos. It would require the same bravery, honesty, and humility she once demanded from the world. It would require a public reckoning with her failures, not just a private one. And it would require a willingness to be seen not as a flawless symbol, but as a flawed, hurting, learning human being. In the end, Lizzo's story is not just about fame or failure. It is about the fragile, complicated nature of leadership, the weight of expectations, and the painful truth that empowerment is not a brand to sell, but a responsibility to live. Whether Lizzo rises again or remains a cautionary tale will depend not on the forgiveness of the public, but on the authenticity of her own transformation. Because real empowerment starts not with but with humility. Not with a slogan, but with the courage to confront the harm we cause and to change because of it.